good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm, as Erica mentioned, I'm with the Arctic Landscape Conservation Cooperatives, and for those who don't know what LCCs are, briefly, they're Department of Interior convened regional partnerships of agencies and other organizations intended to provide scientific information important for natural resource conservation. And Arctic LCC has focused a lot of attention on climate change as a major driver, stressor for natural resource conservation in the Arctic. And one of our preoccupations has been trying to coordinate long-term observing, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. We've been in a multi-year planning phase for an initiative we call TEON, the Terrestrial Environmental Observation Network for Northern Alaska. Okay, I'm trying to advance my slide, and it's not advancing, so let's see. There we go. Great. So the activities I'm going to talk about today, I want to put them in the IARPIC context, and really the TEON activities fall in the intersection, I think, of the terrestrial ice and ecosystems and observing systems teams. And both of those IARPIC activity areas have kind of high-level goals that speak to coordination and integration of research and facilitation of observing system design. And what I'd like to do today is to give you some sense of how we've approached that coordinating and facilitating task and what that actually looks like at the ground level for us. So very broadly, the purpose of TEON is to provide a sustainable terrestrial environmental observing network and to collect, distribute, and synthesize long-term observational data. Coming from DOI, there's a distinct natural resource conservation thrust to what we're doing. We're interested in those aspects of change that relate most to wildlife and habitat change. But we also believe that what we're doing can serve other end users, including communities and industry. So we didn't make all this up when we, oops, I'm going automatically through these slides at a pace I didn't expect. So sorry about that. But what you're seeing flashing on the screen is various reports, scientific syntheses, many of which are familiar to you folks. And as we reviewed those, certain themes seem to emerge, and among those are the ones you see at the lower left here, the idea of having multi-decadal observations, coordination in two distinct flavors, cross-discipline and cross-organization, and also, especially for those of us in the natural resource field, hydrology and changing hydrology as a key integrator of environmental change came up often. And so as we developed our plan, which was released in 2013 and on which we got a lot of help from Dr. Ben Crosby at Idaho State University, we focused on focal watersheds as a spatial structure for an observation network. And in thinking about how to choose watersheds, we considered various criteria. Practical considerations were very important to us. We wanted to minimize the cost and try to make this as sustainable as possible. And we wanted to ensure continuity of existing data streams and archives where they already existed. We also tried to be responsive to management concerns. So, for instance, we were cognizant of places where there was current or planned industrial activity and where our program could strengthen monitoring or science programs of individual agencies, such as the Park Service's Arctic Network, BLM's NPRA monitoring plan, or Fish and Wildlife Service's refuge inventory and monitoring program. So we wanted to strengthen those programs while also contributing to a greater whole. And we are also attempting to represent the major spatial and temporal ecological gradients that we already understand exist on the North Slope. And this map shows our candidate watersheds overlaid on an ecological landscape map. So these are currently the watersheds that we're considering for this network. We intentionally, as I mentioned just now, we intentionally picked watersheds that span the ecoregions present in the area, that span the longitudinal gradient, north and south sides of the Brooks Range, as well as glacier-dominated and non-glacial systems. Within each proposed focal watershed, we've also identified sub-watersheds that are specific to an ecoregion and nested within the larger watershed. And within those sub-watersheds, we have identified potential sampling sites, and each site would contain a cluster of observation stations where we would measure a consistent set of core variables. And we chose four major areas of or sectors that we were concerned with: meteorology, climate, surface water, including discharge and some basic water quality measurements, soil and shallow permafrost, and vegetation. This slide is just on the left a schematic of what a TION site might look like. And here you have a red highlighted dot shows a MET station. And I'm going to go through this really quickly. There's not time to discuss the particular parameters in any detail, but we have a MET site. This slide shows surface water sampling stations nearby, hooked to the same, potentially hooked to a data logger at the MET site. We would also be sampling vegetation and that vegetation sampling sites would be stratified by ecotype to allow us to extrapolate to a larger area. And both associated with vegetation sites, we'd have distributed soil temperature and moisture sensors, as well as perhaps a deeper thermistor string associated with the MET site at letter C there. So this is a schematic. This is what we would hope to have installed at each site. And I don't want to dwell on that too much longer because I need to move on to other aspects of this coordination. And field sampling is just one of the things that comprise an observation system. We also need to pay a lot of attention to data management and data dissemination. That's just as important. And our aspiration is to go beyond the minimum standard, which would be a public access archive of the discipline of each discipline-specific data set. Because we're a place-based monitoring system where data sets have a distinct spatial and conceptual relationship, we want to design the data system to reflect that. And we don't want users to have to harvest these data pieces from many places and put them all back together. So toward that end, with help from USGS, we put a good deal of effort into database design and data modeling, and I don't expect that you can read any of this, but the parts and pieces of that data model, each box represents the different data streams, data sets that we'll be collecting, and the arrows here and there represent the relationships among those different data sets. And having said that, while we are trying to design a data sets specifically to house TION data, we're also cognizant that there are other data resources, and we're aware that there are existing warehouses for data, such as ACADIS, the USGS NWIS system for data discharge, or NRCS, Soil Data Mart. And so hopefully our data can be exported to these other repositories and certainly discoverable from other sites. One new resource that this is a bit of a self-advertisement, I guess, but I wanted to mention one resource that Arctic LCC has been involved in developing, which aggregates hydroclimate and related data sets, including some soil permafrost data, into a single user interface. We call it the IMIC data portal, and there's a web link up there. I would encourage you guys to take a look at it. It's at its version 1.0 stage, and hopefully we'll get better, but I think it's already providing a useful data aggregation service. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to coordinate monitoring. And so here are some of the ways that we have been coordinating. When we are considering where to site observations sensors, we're trying to complement, not duplicate, existing efforts. So, for example, this map of Fish Creek and the Ablutuak River drainages shows locations currently occupied by the USGS borehole and temperature network that Gary Clow presented on at our last terrestrial ecosystem team meeting, as well as activities currently underway funded by Bureau of Land Management. So to the extent possible, we inventory these existing activities, and our aim is to strengthen those programs by adding funds and filling gaps in the assortment of measurements at each site so that we end up with a consistent set across watersheds. Another aspect of coordination is taking advice and getting input from a variety of experts and agencies already involved in observing, and we have an active technical advisory group called the TION TAG, and currently agencies represented on that group includes several from Interior Department, NOAA, Agriculture, Environment Canada, and also academic institutions like UAF. And there's a URL at the bottom of this slide to take you to our collaborative workspace, and you can see records of our past meetings, discussions, background information there if you're interested. And part of that TION TAG activity is reviewing existing protocols. We're trying not to reinvent things that are already out there, and we're trying as best we can to implement protocols that are comparable to those that are existing. In this case, we're looking at vegetation sampling protocols. Obviously, we can't adopt everybody's protocols because they differ, but we're at least taking those decisions seriously and taking a look at what's already out there. And then finally, in the implementation stage, we are, by necessity, because the Arctic LCC doesn't have the funding to support all this ourselves, we're looking at coordinating funding and support for multiple collaborators. So, for instance, our first watershed that we hope to implement in this coming year will be the Kaparic watershed, and we're going to do that through a variety of mechanisms. The weather and hydrology measurements will hopefully be implemented via a cooperative agreement from the Arctic LCC to an academic institution, and also in-kind collaboration with the Tulik Field Station. Soils permafrost measurements, we're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to collaborate with Vlad Romanovsky's group, who have NSF AON funding to install sensors in our watersheds, and also some in-kind contributions from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, formerly Soil Conservation Service, to help us with soil characterization. And vegetation work, we hope to implement through in-kind contributions from NRCS and Fish and Wildlife Service. So back to the beginning, I guess I wanted to end with some thoughts about how IARPIC relates to all this activity, and I recognize that I'm less than objective on this because we've worked so hard on this, but I think this is the type of activity that is what IARPIC is supposed to be about, coordination and collaboration. And while I think we're being responsive to those high-level IARPIC goals, none of this activity is expressed as a milestone, and therefore it's kind of invisible to plan implementation. And I suspect there's a lot of other activities out there that are also similarly not reflected as well as they might be in the milestones from individual activity areas. So that's something to think about as we revise the plan. And then lastly, there's a lot of enthusiasm for this approach at the ground level. I've been very impressed and grateful for all the really volunteer contributions from the technical advisory group and others trying to help us think through this process. That enthusiasm doesn't necessarily percolate up to regional management or national management, and there's some obstacles here in that there really is no agency with a specific mandate to do this work, and all the potential partners in this endeavor are struggling to maintain their activities on pretty tight budgets these days. So I guess I leave you with a question. If this activity is important, if this is the kind of thing we should be aiming for, maybe not exactly this, but something that looks sort of like this, how can IARPIC, how can we all help those who are on the ground trying to implement the high-level goals of IARPIC, but getting into these kind of details and overcoming the obstacles that are out there? So that's my question for you guys, and now I'm ready for your questions, I guess.
Thank you, Phil. Anyone have questions for Phillip? Remember to unmute yourself when you ask your question.
Hi, Phil. This is Peter Griffith at NASA Goddard.
Hi, Peter.
How are you?
I'm well. Yourself?
Oh, I'm just floating on cloud nine with the solicitation having been released, which I suspect you saw when I laughed it out.
For getting that out. I did see it, and I've had a chance to take the first look at it and thinking about how we might go forward and work with you guys on that. We don't have to do this online here, but I would like to follow up a little closer on some of those the data protocols that you identified. That lovely detailed relational database schema would be interesting to understand. And I guess the GINA folks, is Dane involved? Dane Broderson involved in helping with all of that? Not so much the TION data design. We've mostly been working with Dennis Walworth at USGS Alaska Science Center, the data modeling. GINA, though, has been the essential partner in bringing that IMIC database online, and we expect there will be a relationship there where we export TION data into IMIC, yeah.
Yeah, as I think you've heard me spout in the past, and it's described in the call for proposals, that we are aspiring with above to both to contribute to these well organized observational schemas, and as well as be able to take from them. But that's one of the things that fall into the category of all that's left to do is everything.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Questions?
This is Sarah. Phillip, I may have missed it. I'm sorry. I was wondering as well what the relationship to ADIWIG is here as well.
Well, our data manager is really active on the ADIWIG group, and so for that group has been to develop metadata standards, both on the project level and the data level. And so naturally, we are looking at conforming to those standards, which I guess the way that fits in is that, you know, any other group that's able to harvest data meeting those standards will have better access for any data that we generate through this effort.
Thanks.
I'm not sure if that was very, but ADIWIG's focus has been really metadata standards that allow data sharing, both, you know, machine to machine, and sharing among different portals, and improving discoverability.
Yeah, and that's why I think the coordination with them is so important, because it does make the data interoperable at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Other questions?
So, sorry, Erica, this is another question. I'm not sure. I didn't see too much in the presentation about stakeholder outreach, but I know it's been going on. You've had quite a bit of it. So what's the communication with communities, and what vehicles are you using for that?
On this project, I have to admit there's been rather little communication with, if you're talking about stakeholders in terms of communities, as in literal communities, villages, and we haven't really communicated very much about this particular project of ours. In general, so our stakeholders, this effort, have mostly been so far agencies and academic communities involved in observing, and while we believe that data products from this effort will help answer questions that communities have, our concepts of those questions are mainly secondhand, from gleaning from existing assessments and what's already in the literature, so not direct conversation, I guess. So that's probably not the best answer, but it's the truthful answer.
Hi, Phillip. This is Judy. I'm just relaying a question from Mika Mered, and she says, hi, Phillip. I know I may be skipping some research steps here, but do you already have some policy-oriented recommendations at this point that we could work on?
I probably don't, and I'm actually, I guess I would ask in what realm policy, in terms of, yeah, if I could get more clarification on that.
Okay, I think Mika does not have a microphone, which is why she's texting her question. So I'll relay any information as it comes in.
Bill, I've got one quick question for you. When you showed the map of the Kaparak and I'm going to mess it up, Ulu Butak. So when you're augmenting, yeah, that one, that's great. When you're augmenting these sites that are already in place, I'm wondering, is there a DOI strategy? Is there a long-term investment in certain sites? I ask this because I remember when there was the evaluation of the USGS hydro program and some of the sites were decommissioned. You know, is having this investment, this leveraging, does it provide additional strength to the argument within DOI itself to maintain some of these sites when there are these evaluation processes going on? And, you know, what would you do in the context of TIAN if one of these pre-existing sites was decommissioned? Is it then your burden to step in, or how does that work?
That's a really perceptive question. So currently, and I think Frank Urban is on the line, so he could speak for the network of weather stations and borehole temperature sensor arrays. But currently, so that's one of the dots that some of the dots you see on this map, and then others are ones that are especially stream gauging that's funded through the BLM Arctic District, and their funding is anything but certain. In fact, they don't even know, at least last time I talked to them, whether they have funding to continue this year. So, so I guess the short answer is no, there's no overall DOI strategy, and that's a problem for us. My hope is that identifying some of these sites as contributing to this greater whole would help raise their status and elevate their status in terms of importance. But without some sort of budget line or mandate coming from a high level to the DOI agencies here that this is an important activity, long-term Arctic observing, I'm not even sure politically or tactically how to I guess instill that awareness at the upper level management, and that's partly probably my lack of sophistication in what it takes to do that. But that's really what we need to do to make this work. Obviously, having two sources of funding, both through Fish and Wildlife Services, LCC, and BLM, might help us weather some down years at either end, but it's a very difficult way to build a long-term sustained effort and sort of assurance of some level of continued funding. Very ad hoc.
Thanks for your candor.
Yeah. So anyway, and that's kind of where I was going with my closing comments. I don't know how the IARPIC, how the IARPIC group can help us with that, those of us engaged in this at the field level, but helping to instill that awareness and helping to raise its visibility would be, if you can help me figure out how to do that. I don't mean you personally, Erica, but IARPIC as a group, that would be great.
Well, hopefully that's a good segue into our discussion about the assessment and where we are in that process, because we would like to use that tool to provide you with the argument. That's just one of the many applications of the assessment, is to show how important these measurements are.
Sounds good.